Welcome back to part 2 of lecture 9. And I don't believe I made it through that entire lecture on summarizing without quoting the Princess Bride. Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me summarize. With that rectified, let me get back to our lecture notes and talk about synthesis, which is your other main task for paper 2. So we covered a lot of this in the original lecture on the project, which we went over in one of our live Zoom chats. But just to get everyone up to speed, you are doing two things in your synthesis for this project. This is going to be roughly the last 1,000 to 1,250 words of your paper. And I want you to think of this in terms of boundaries. So when you do your summaries, as you've done your review of the existing literature, you are establishing not just what exactly other scholars have done, but what are kind of the parameters in which that scholarship has shown up? Where are the lines on the map, as it were? Say, here's this particular method, here's this population, we're going to look at this area in here, because that gives you an idea of what's been covered and what you could potentially contribute that's new or different. Because you're under no obligation to say, you know what, they've done good work here, I'm going to do good work on something slightly different. You could say, you know what, I want to do something completely different here. That's certainly your prerogative. But you also have to keep in mind that they say, I say model that we argue in context. And so if you're going to do something completely different, then you need to show, all right, what is different about this? How does this connect to the previous conversations? How is this advancing understanding in some way? And those are the kind of the dual challenges of putting together a scholarly argument. One is you do have to have some sort of new approach, but it also has to be important in some way to people who care about those things, to show that you may have a completely new idea for example, treating COVID-19. Could be a great idea, could save a lot of lives. But unless you can start with, okay, what has been done? What do we already know about how this virus works? What do we know about what doesn't work for treating it? And what do we know about things like how much would this cost? Or can we produce enough of this stuff? Or what is going to be maybe some of the ethical implications of this? Until you have that groundwork, you don't quite get to where you can say now for something completely new and completely different. So I'm going to break this up into 4 steps, and there's some good resources on the web. If you Google literature review and synthesis, you'll find some nice handouts. I'm going to approach this in terms of compare, contrast, evaluate, interpret, and contribute. So focusing on those action verbs of what you want to do at each stage. So to start off with the compare, contrast, guess what you're doing in this stage? As you did with the third response paper, where you looked at Baumann's some thoughts on ethics and Milgram's response to Baumann, you want to find some useful point of comparison or contrast, or possibly both, between and among the studies that you've already summarized. So here, rather than zooming in and saying, okay, here's specifically what this person or this group or whatever found, here's what was significant about their work, what they contributed, and here's what I found interesting, you're going to zoom back out and you're going to say, now that they see this and this and this and this together, what do I make of it? What keeps coming up? Are they arguing about a particular theme or idea? Do they bring up this term over and over? Do they look at this technique? Are they trying to refine this? Do they look at the same kinds of data? And that doesn't mean they're going to agree with each other, but it does mean that they agree that this particular aspect of this particular approach is important enough to do another study on it. And so you want to look at part of this as where's that agreement and where is that disagreement. In some cases, academics get along perfectly well. They say, all right, there are these 5 studies that have been done on a similar topic to mine. They all had potentially important contributions. Let me tell you how they all work. There's kind of that summary part. But here's why I think we need to do this differently, or extend this, or change this variable, or rethink this assumption, or whatever it is. And that is how those conversations grow and develop until we actually have fields. So you no longer have to start with, okay, there's this round thingy and it can like turn. And if you put 4 of them under a horse, no, not under a horse, that's a bad idea. Under a box, yes, we'll definitely put them under a box and with a horse up front, or maybe not everywhere. And you see where I'm going with this. You couldn't get there unless you had some of that productive conversation, the agreement and disagreement we've been talking about all quarter. One tool that you might find helpful is called a synthesis matrix. And you've probably seen this in charts, especially in academic articles. Anytime you have a big literature review, especially in an article that's mainly designed to review that literature as a synthesis article, then you've got this big chart that says, so here are the main topics on one side, here are the authors on the other side. We're going to see how each author treats each topic. So I've looked into a couple of resources on this. This is basically a tracking tool. It can actually help for both your summary and your synthesis parts, because if you do it as you go, as you're reading, as you're taking notes, then you have a much better sense of what each author is arguing, but you can also use that in the synthesis part to find those connections. And that's where the compare and contrast comes in first. So this first link is kind of a description of how this goes as a PDF version, and the second one has templates, I believe, in Word and I want to say Excel. It also has a couple of useful examples there. So if you find those helpful, feel free to use those to organize your thinking. The second task in the synthesis is to evaluate how these studies work. So this is where you're going to bring in your skills in rhetorical analysis. So we're going to bring in your reading and interpretation skills. And again, think a little bit broader than just what does one study do, or how do these two particular studies interact with each other? What does this group as a whole tell you about the field? What does it tell you about how people in that discipline, or that research area, do their work? What are they interested in? What topics keep coming up? And why might those be significant or important for specialists or experts or policymakers or whatever group is going to be reading this material? Sometimes, honestly, it's a function of what projects are getting funded. Sometimes it's a matter of, a lot of people are talking a lot about, this one text or this one theory or this one data set. This is why right now every single epidemiologist, certainly, and a lot of other medical professionals and a lot of other research scientists are focused pretty much exclusively on COVID-19. Makes a lot of sense. In 10 years, will that be the case? Probably not. I hope not. I can't do 10 more years of this. But there may be different topics that arise there. Because by the time an article shows up in a database, it means that the authors and whoever they convince to fund them have decided, hey, this is really cool and interesting and important, and we're going to do some work on this. But also the editors, the journal editors, and the peer reviewers decided, okay, you know what, this is worth contributing. This does something important for the field and for the discipline. And so this is going to reflect things that people are likely to be interested in. We all have research interests that don't quite make it into articles because maybe you're the only one in the world who would read that book. Well, probably your mom would read it too. Hi, Mom. But not a lot of other people. I want to clarify that in this section, you don't have to evaluate them in the sense of ranking your sources or saying, I really like these and I found these less helpful. But kind of do be honest and intelligent about the potential pros and cons here. The main question I want you to ask and what should you address, maybe is a better term. What have these articles specifically taught you about the field and the kind of work that other people are doing? Because that's a very valuable professional skill. The farther you get into any sort of professional career, the more you specialize, especially in an academic track. And so there are going to be things that are right up your alley, things that are very well aligned with your interest and your expertise. But it's also helpful to know what other people are thinking about. What questions are they asking? What resources are they producing? And how might that be useful for you? And this is not just true in academic fields. As an editor, I'm a member of several Facebook groups on different kinds of editing, different aspects. And some of the stuff, some of the discussions and threads aren't really that relevant to me and the kind of work that I do. Like there's a whole group for fiction editors, and I really don't do a lot of fiction editing. Mostly edit nonfiction, mostly academic. But when they are talking about things like, how do I communicate with my client about this? Or how do I understand how this is going? Or even how do I improve this particular phrase, this particular sentence? That helps me because I'm learning more about the process, about the craft. And I'm also learning what kinds of things should I be thinking about, because what kind of questions that maybe they're asking or their clients are asking are the same that mine might ask as well. Your third task then is kind of to take what you've evaluated and interpret that. So this is actually a pretty straightforward task. I would recommend breaking this up into its own paragraph. So take that first paragraph of your synthesis and go through the compare, contrast, and the evaluation. And this is where you kind of get to step back and say, okay, so in your own words, what progress has been made here? What do we know? What have we learned? And I'm thinking kind of the broader we of the field or the discipline. And why is that important? I want to see here that you can approach these articles not just as individual studies, but as kind of representatives of a larger discourse, a larger set of conversations about these topics. So this is where it'll take a little bit of getting used to, because you're going to have to be in expert mode. You might not be quite there yet in your own studies, but it gives you practice in thinking like an expert, thinking like someone who is specializing in this. You've got a taste of this already. Think of how your conversations are different when you're talking to students who are also in your major or in your advanced classes versus just in the gen ed classes. I used to teach a business writing class at Ohio State, and we had several students who were in the public relations track. Now, I didn't know a lot really about that particular field, but I could really tell when they hit upon a topic or a task or something that matched their expertise, because they would get really excited and the jargon would keep coming up and they'd start talking about all these things that they covered in class and apply all this stuff there. And it was great. It really helped in some of the group work because they could use that expertise there. And you're going to take a similar attitude there, showing why is this important for this particular group of experts. The other thing you want to do in this section is think about potential gaps or weaknesses in the scholarship. And I've talked about this already, but you need to figure out where are those boundaries lacking. Where could there be places that we need to push a little beyond this and say, all right, we've got a good grasp of X, but Y is not very well understood. Or we know how this process works, but what if there is a side effect? Or what if we're missing an explanation here? What if there's a mechanism that could actually explain this better? So here's where you make a rhetorical transition. You've shown, here's what's been done. Here's what trends I see going on. Here's how I see the strengths and the weaknesses of kind of the overall conversation going. And now you have to get specific. So now you want to say, based on this, here are some areas that aren't really covered as well. Or here's something that these authors have not really considered much. Or here's something that recent scholarship has even not touched at all. And what that looks like will depend on your field and your interests, maybe a different application of a theory or a method. It may be getting data from a different source. It may be kind of reevaluating a category. In my work, in my dissertation, I did a little bit of all of that. I was looking at different theories to approach this set of novels, but also saying, you know what? Most people, if they even bother to talk about this novel, say, ugh, it's so bad, guys. Why are we bothering to read this? It's so bad. And it's like, oh, but shut up. But I had to say that in 300 words or 300 pages, not words. So this is your opportunity. You could say, here's some strengths, but also here's some gaps, here's some weaknesses, and this is where I want to go next with that. And that, of course, is your last task. Your job in that last section, and this paragraph will take you a while, is to describe a potential research project that would improve the field, and then explain how and why it would make a useful contribution. And so you have to do that in terms of what has already been done. So think of a couple aspects of that. First, content. What have people written about? Where have they looked for data? Who have they talked to? What methods have they used? How have they covered particular implications? What context have they looked under? But also think of kind of the breadth or the depth of that coverage. Maybe there are 10 studies on advanced literature students and like the English majors and how well they write papers. I would hope to be that pretty well. But maybe there's only one study on how the freshman English majors write papers. That could be a gap that you could explore there. It's frustrating at the professional and scholarly level to have this great idea, go out and do a literature review and find, oh, someone did this topic already. But that doesn't mean you have to give up. So as you are thinking about potential topics, as you're going through your sources, maybe you'll have a great idea as you're reading paper 1 and paper 2 and paper 3, and then you get to paper 4 and, oh, paper 4 covered your great idea. Well, you could still say, all right, how can I maybe extend this? What can I improve about how paper 4 does this? How can I test this in a different area? Now, since you're not actually writing that new study, just proposing it, it's a little bit easier, but it's a habit to get into as you're deciding, how can I come up with something new and interesting that hasn't been done 100 times before? So you want to take your cue from the work you've done. As you decide what might be a new variable, think about categories of variables. What sort of variables do others look at? What could make a difference here? If you change a population, a demographic, a sample, if you change your theoretical base, if you change your analytical method, if you've gathered new or different data, what would you expect to find differently? What could set your work apart from what's been done in other contexts? Above all, and I'm going to come back to this, my last lecture of the quarter, what's the so what? Where is the takeaway for the work you want to do? And you got to be honest here about what could you potentially contribute. It's okay to speculate, because obviously you haven't written the study yet. You don't know exactly what it would contribute. But you could say, I think if we extended this approach and didn't just look at public school students, but also homeschooling students or private school students, or I think if we looked at this particular type of cancer cell and not just this one, or we looked at this particular consumer behavior in this context and not just this other one that's been done, we would get something valuable from that. So there's the two main tasks for you in this section. find something new, and show me why that something new is important. In closing, the goal of this project is for you to help you out. I don't know if or when you'll actually get to do the project that you talk about in this paper. But I do know that as you advance in your coursework, as you have more responsibility, as you specialize more, as you gain more expertise in your academic and professional fields, that you will have to think like this. You will have to perform more specialized tasks and put together that research and figure out what has been done already. So in the same way that I want you to argue like a grown-up, I want you to think like a researcher here. Maybe it's just a thought exercise at this point. Maybe you'll be able to do the work in a few years. But this is the payoff of the literature review. It's not just, look, here are 5 sources on this topic. I know more about this topic. Good job, but that's not the end. There's going to be the payoff. And in scholarly writing, that payoff is, now let me show you what I say in response to that they say. So come back in the next lecture and look at how do you show that significance. And that will be up at the end of this week, and that will pretty much take us to the end of the quarter. So as you are working on your projects, if you have any questions about how to do these tasks, please email me. We can set up a time to chat, or we can work on email and hope to help you work through those. In the meantime, I look forward to reading your research proposals and to finding out all the cool stuff you're going to write about for this paper. See you next time.